When we talk about Jonathan Edwards, it's easy to talk in superlatives. He's the greatest mind America's ever produced. He preached the most famous sermon Americans have ever heard. And yet we often overlook his failures. We often forget about his struggles. For example, we could consider the Bad Book affair and how it was handled badly. We could talk about his owning of slaves. But oftentimes when we think about his failures, the one that comes to mind is the end of his ministry there in Northampton. Like so many modern preachers who struggle with churches that are resistant to change, churches that push back when the pastor begins to push for reformation. Today, the challenge for many of us is that we often push too soon, that we've not earned the equity, the reputation, the right to challenge the way the church is run. In Edwards' case, however, he was there at the church in Northampton for over 20 years before his demise came about. And yet it's in his demise that we can learn much that applies even till today. We can learn about his grace. We can look at his mercy and how he handled his accusers. We can feel his grief as he struggled with the heartache of a church that would not listen, a church that needed reform that would not change, a church that he loved, a church that he sweat in many ways suffered for, physically anyway. And here they are pushing back for political reasons, for theological reasons. And so we can learn from this pastor about how we can approach challenges at church as well. We can listen to his prayers and learn about his trust and faith in a God who, while sovereign, is also merciful. We can read his final sermon there, one that Mark Dever said is the greatest sermon preached in American history. And we can hear Edwards' heart as he speaks of his love for the congregation, even in spite of the rejection of his leadership. We can see how he turned to beloved friends and counselors for advice, and how, though he did not want to leave the church, he took their advice, accepted the vote, and moved on when he was dismissed. We see how he gladly, willingly stepped up to serve the church that had just fired him as their interim pastor in one sense for months while they looked for a replacement. We hear his wisdom in not being willing to start another church in Northampton for fear of causing further division in the kingdom of God in that little village. And then we see through it all the love and mercy of the sovereign God who listened, who understood Edwards' cry, who had a grand plan, and who ultimately moved Edwards through this season of struggle into some of his most productive years of writing, his theologizing. Books that stand today as the classic works of Jonathan Edwards are all the result of a failed ministry and the rejection of a beloved pastor.